The press conference room was packed. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and a sea of reporters buzzed with anticipation. Standing confidently at the podium was Karoline Leavitt, poised and ready to address the nation. The air was thick with tension as a journalist raised his hand, his voice sharp and skeptical. "Ms. Leavitt, don't you think your unwavering faith has no place in politics?" The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. What happened next would leave the nation stunned. Karoline Leavitt, a rising political star known for her eloquence and conviction, had recently become the youngest White House press secretary in history. At just 27, she was a trailblazer, admired for her quick wit, unwavering values, and ability to handle even the toughest critics. Her strong Christian faith was both her guiding light and a point of contention among her detractors. Opposing her was Ethan Gray, an outspoken journalist and staunch atheist. Known for his hard-hitting questions and relentless pursuit of controversial topics, he had built a reputation for challenging public figures. Ethan was determined to undermine Karoline's credibility, believing her faith-based convictions to be incompatible with the modern political landscape. The scene unfolds in Washington, D.C., at a highly publicized press conference. The event was meant to address the administration's latest policies, but tensions simmered as the topic shifted toward Karoline's personal beliefs. Ethan's opening question set the stage for a heated exchange. "How can someone like you, who believes in divine intervention, make decisions based on facts and logic? Shouldn't politics be free from religious bias?" Karoline paused, her composed demeanor masking the storm brewing within her. She knew this moment was crucial, not just for her reputation, but for millions of Americans who shared her faith and values. As the tension mounted, the audience leaned in, waiting for her response. Karoline smiled, her eyes calm but determined. "Mr. Gray," she began, her voice steady yet piercing, "you've asked an important question. Allow me to answer it, not just for you, but for everyone here." Ethan wasn't done after his first sharp question. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes as he continued. "Ms. Leavitt, do you honestly believe that a nation as diverse as ours can be led by someone who clings to ancient texts? Isn't it hypocritical to preach unity while adhering to exclusive beliefs that inherently divide?" His tone was condescending, his words deliberate. Murmurs spread across the room, filling the air with a mix of agreement and unease. Some reporters nodded subtly, agreeing with Ethan's challenge, while others frowned, uncomfortable with his directness. Karoline's critics exchanged knowing glances, their smirks implying that the press secretary had finally been cornered. Karoline's supporters, however, sat straighter in their chairs, their expressions tight with tension. They believed in her strength, but even they couldn't deny the weight of Ethan's words. For a moment, silence fell, as if the entire room collectively held its breath, waiting for her response. Before Karoline could answer, other reporters jumped into the fray. A younger journalist, clearly emboldened by Ethan's line of questioning, raised his voice. "Ms. Leavitt, don't you think the principle of separation of church and state is at risk when someone with such strong religious convictions holds a position like yours?" Karoline met the journalist's gaze calmly but didn't answer right away. Before she could, Laura Benton, a seasoned journalist with a reputation for fairness, interjected. Her voice was softer, but her words carried weight. "Ms. Leavitt, many Americans admire your faith and the values you stand for," Laura began. "But how do you reconcile those values with the constitutional principle of secular governance? People want to know how you balance the two without allowing one to overshadow the other." Karoline nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan pressed on, his tone growing sharper. "Answer this, Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Can you name a single instance where your faith hasn't clouded your judgment? A single decision where you prioritized facts over belief?" The room buzzed with tension. Ethan's words were harsh, but they struck at the heart of the debate. Was it possible for someone with deep religious convictions to lead without bias? Karoline's face remained composed, but her hands tightened slightly on the podium. She understood the stakes of this moment. Her supporters in the room, though silent, were visibly anxious. Their faith in her was unwavering, but they knew this was no easy challenge. Her critics, on the other hand, exchanged smug glances, convinced that they'd finally exposed the flaw in her armor. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a small, triumphant smile tugging at his lips. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Karoline faltered, it wouldn't just be her reputation on the line. It could also alienate millions of Americans who saw her as a symbol of hope and moral integrity. But if she succeeded, she had the opportunity to bridge one of the deepest divides in the nation, the clash between faith and secularism. Karoline knew that her response could either cement her as a leader who could unite people or cast her as someone unable to defend her convictions. Karoline took a deep breath, ready to face the challenge head-on. Karoline's eyes swept over the room, meeting the gazes of reporters and onlookers alike. Instead of rushing to defend herself, she took a deep breath and smiled. A calm, confident smile that disarmed even her harshest critics. "Mr. Gray," she began, her voice steady but warm, "you've raised a question that deserves an honest answer. Let me share a story with you." The room grew quieter as she continued. "I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire," she said. "My father was a firefighter, a man of simple but unwavering faith. When I was 10 years old, he ran into a burning building to save a little boy. The flames were raging and he knew the risks. When he came out, the boy was safe, but my father was badly burned." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "Later, I asked him why he did it. Why he put his life on the line for someone he didn't even know. He told me, because every life is precious, Karoline. That's what my faith teaches me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Karoline's tone shifted as she addressed the broader implications of Ethan's question. "Faith isn't about bias or exclusion," she said. "It's about values, compassion, integrity, and a commitment to serving others. My father's faith didn't cloud his judgment. It guided him to do what was right, even at great personal cost. And that's the same faith that guides me today." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Faith, Mr. Gray, isn't a hindrance to logic, it's a complement. It inspires me to seek truth, to fight for justice, and to serve this nation with humility and purpose. Isn't that what we all want, regardless of our beliefs?" For the first time, Ethan seemed taken aback. He leaned back in his chair, his skeptical expression softening slightly. The tension in his posture eased as he listened. The room, which had been so tense moments ago, now seemed to shift. Reporters exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Some nodded in quiet agreement, while others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Quiet applause broke out in the back of the room, hesitant at first but growing louder. Karoline's words had struck a chord, not just with her supporters but with many who had been undecided. Ethan, though shaken by Karoline's heartfelt story, wasn't ready to back down. He leaned forward again, his expression a mix of skepticism and determination. "If your faith is so inclusive, Ms. Leavitt, why do so many feel excluded by it? Can you truly lead a nation where not everyone shares your beliefs without unintentionally marginalizing those who don't?" His question was met with murmurs from the press and audience alike. It was a fair point, and even Karoline's supporters in the room seemed to acknowledge the weight of it. Ethan's words lingered, hanging heavily in the air, challenging Karoline to respond. Karoline stepped away from the podium slightly, as if to address the room more personally. Her voice remained steady, but there was a fire behind her eyes. "Exclusion isn't a product of faith," she began firmly. "It's a product of fear. And fear thrives when we stop listening to one another. My faith doesn't compel me to exclude, it compels me to listen, to understand, and to find common ground. Can we not do the same here today?" The room was silent as her words sank in. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Karoline continued, her voice growing stronger. "You see, Mr. Gray," she said, "I don't lead from a place of imposing my beliefs. I lead from a place of shared values. Honesty, justice, compassion. These aren't exclusive to people of faith, they're universal. And that's what binds us as a nation. Not what we believe, but how we choose to live those beliefs out." Ethan sat back in his chair, seemingly at a loss for words. For the first time, his confident facade cracked, revealing a flicker of doubt. The reporters in the room watched him intently, some with raised eyebrows, waiting to see if he would challenge her again, but instead, Ethan surprised everyone. He nodded slowly and admitted, "I may not share your beliefs, Ms. Leavitt, but I respect your conviction. That's more than I can say for most politicians." The tension in the room broke as quiet applause began to ripple through the crowd. It started small, but quickly grew louder, until many were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Even those who had been skeptical of Karoline's position couldn't deny the strength and grace with which she had handled the moment. Karoline smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She raised her hand, signaling for the crowd to quiet. "America isn't great because we all believe the same thing," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's great because we don't, and yet, we come together, bound by our shared hope for a better future." The room erupted into applause once more, louder this time, as Karoline stepped back from the podium. The press conference ended, but the impact of Karoline's words rippled far beyond the room. Social media exploded with reactions almost immediately, with hashtags like #Karoline Leavitt, #Faith in Leadership, and #Unity Over Division trending nationwide. News outlets aired clips of her speech, with commentators on both sides of the political spectrum weighing in. Surprisingly, even some of her critics admitted that her response had been powerful and thought-provoking. Ethan, now back at his desk, sat staring at a blank document on his laptop. He had come to the press conference with every intention of exposing Karoline's perceived flaws, but now he found himself at a loss. Her words had resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected, forcing him to confront his own biases. When he finally began typing, his article took on a surprisingly balanced tone. "While I remain skeptical of the role of faith in politics," he wrote, "Ms. Leavitt demonstrated a rare ability to navigate difficult questions with grace and authenticity. Her emphasis on shared values over religious differences is a message we could all benefit from hearing." Karoline, reflecting on the events of the day, sat in her office surrounded by her closest advisors. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more questions, and more critics. But this moment had reaffirmed her belief in the power of dialogue and understanding. "I didn't change his mind," she admitted, referring to Ethan. "But maybe I planted a seed. And sometimes that's enough." Her advisors nodded, their respect for her evident. "You didn't just plant a seed," one of them said. "You reminded people what real leadership looks like." Across the country, people of all backgrounds and beliefs were talking about Karoline's words. Some praised her courage and authenticity, while others debated the role of faith in leadership. But one thing was clear: Karoline had sparked a national conversation, one that transcended political and ideological divides. A week later, Karoline addressed the nation in a televised speech. Standing behind the same podium, she looked directly into the camera, her expression serious but hopeful. "My fellow Americans," she began, "last week I was asked some tough questions about faith, leadership, and unity. And while we may not all agree on the answers, I believe the conversation itself is what matters most." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What unites us as a nation is far greater than what divides us. Whether you share my faith or not, we all have a responsibility to treat one another with respect and compassion. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what we believe, it's about how we live those beliefs out." Karoline's voice grew stronger as she continued. "So I ask you, not as a politician, but as a fellow American, let's not be afraid of what sets us apart. Instead, let's celebrate it. Let's use our differences as a foundation for understanding, for empathy, and for progress." She looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Together, we can build a brighter future, not by ignoring our differences, but by embracing them." As her speech came to an end, Karoline delivered one final, thought-provoking line. "Because in the end, it's not our beliefs that define us, it's the way we choose to live them. And that, my friends, is what makes America truly great." The screen faded to black as her words lingered in the minds of millions, inspiring hope, unity, and a renewed commitment to understanding one another.